Good afternoon. Thanks for coming today. My name is Paula Robinson, and this is a workshop on what? Do you know? Yeah, what's the title of it? Effective textbook reading, I think, or something of that nature. The first thing I would like you to do is I'm going to hand out some 3x5 cards, one to each of you. And what I want you to do is write down what frustrations or difficulties you have with textbook reading. How many of you are here? How many of you are here to get extra credit? Raise your hand. Let me see. Okay. How many of you are here because you need a little help with textbook reading? Raise your hand. Okay, so I saw a few hands go up that are here for extra credit, but could perhaps also use some help with textbook reading. So on this, write down a couple, 3 things that give you difficulty about textbook reading, that frustrate you, that you wish could be different. And if you cannot think of a single thing, you don't have to turn in a card. But I want you to take a few minutes just to think about this right now. Through the workshops that I've done, I've collected cards before. And last night I took all the cards, because I have a stack of them like this from previous workshops, and I started to categorize them. And the biggest category of difficulty was focus and concentration. Frustration about not being able to focus on what you're reading, frustration about not being able to concentrate for very long with textbook reading. Can any of you relate to that? Yeah. Okay. Even if you didn't put it on a card, can you relate to that? Another large stack was memory. That was probably next largest stack, was not feeling as though you have a way to remember what you read in textbooks. Coupled with there's just so much to read. A lot of cards say there's just too much. There's too much. How can I handle all that reading? And then some of the really funny cards, and I see them here, you know, the variety of ways of expressing it is there's too many words. And as an instructor, as someone who is a teacher, there's a part of me that wants to go, well, just too bad. You know, that's part of college, is that you're going to be reading lots of textbooks with lots of words in it. To me, it's almost humorous to have a student write, there's too many words in my textbooks. Can you see the humor there? Maybe not? I think it's kind of funny. But I appreciate what you're trying to say when you say there's too many words. What's another thing I get a lot on the cards? And I see it a little bit here, but not too much. Boring. It's just boring. The textbook reading is boring. Can you relate to that at all? So it's really all the things I just said, understanding what you're supposed to read, knowing what's important in your reading, what you're supposed to pick out. How do I know what I'm supposed to memorize when there's just so much stuff? In a 50-minute workshop, there's no way I'm going to be able to help you with all that. That's a given. That's an honest assertion on my part, is that there's no way I can help you with all of that. But what I can do is help you just a little bit today to give you a jump start on your textbook reading by giving you a technique that you can use. Some of you have heard of it, and even if you've heard of it, you might have past negative experiences about the process known as SQ3R. Does that ring a bell for any of you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes? Have you used it?
Not really.
Am I putting him on the spot or what? It's okay if you haven't. SQ3R. How many of you have heard of SQ3R besides? Yeah. Okay. Have you used it?
Yeah, I in these class.
Okay. Okay. Then you're very familiar with it. And in fact, some of you may have heard it as SQ4R rather than SQ3R. We're going to deal with 3s today. There's no way I'm going to go through all the steps with you because we don't have time. I'm going to focus on one step. But before I do, I would like to give you, I'm just going to give you three handouts today. I don't believe in a multitude of handouts. The first one is entitled Know Your Textbook. So let me hand that out to you right now. This is before we get to the SQ3R. It's kind of related, though. Just pass those back, will you? Thank you very much. Now, I am not underestimating any of your intelligence in this room. So if I sound a little sarcastic or flippant in what I'm about to say to you, forgive me in advance. But think about whether you can relate to what I'm about to say. How many of you feel like when you go to the bookstore and purchase a textbook and you're given a reading assignment to begin, that the first thing you do is just launch right into the reading itself? Hopefully you do that. How many of you just go right to the reading?
Sometimes.
What?
Depends.
Depends. What do you do other times?
Sometimes I'll flip through it just if I'm interested in the reading.
So sometimes he just launches into the reading, and sometimes you flip through it if you're interested in the subject. That makes sense to me. Okay. When I was your age, and I was given a textbook to read, or bought the textbook to read for college, I would begin looking through the book for one purpose and one purpose only. Guess what that purpose was?
Pictures.
Anybody want to take a guess?
See how many pages you had to read?
Exactly. To see how many pages I was going to have to read. Can you relate to that? And then the second thing I would do is look to see how many illustrations there were, because I knew that would mean less reading I would have to do on that page. Can any of you relate to that? I majored in art history. I think I know why now, because there were a lot of pictures in art history books. But seriously, it's one of the things we do is, I think automatically, once we get past the shock of the $100+ that we just spent for that book, once we get past that, then we begin, we usually, if we do anything with the chapters, say you're assigned chapters 1 through 5, you don't even know where to start, you just start reading. But if you're going to flip through the pages, what you probably do is that. You check to see just how long each chapter is going to be. Now that can be a good thing, because you can begin to manage your time if you see how long each chapter is going to be. What I'm suggesting to you, and this is probably nothing you don't already know, but I'm suggesting that you survey your textbook the moment you get it. Now, what do I mean by that? These are just a few things that you should be checking to see if your textbook has any of these items or all of these items. And I must say in advance that the new textbooks that are out, when I have looked at them, they're pretty fancy. They have a lot of graphics in them that they didn't used to have because of what you can do now on computers. So in some ways, textbooks have improved a lot from the old days, but in other ways, they're almost like too much. There's bells and whistles and all kinds of things in them, and CD-ROMs in the back of the text. Have you noticed that? And the price keeps going up too. So what I'm saying to you is know your textbook. So after you buy it, it says, bullet number 1, survey your textbook as soon as you get it. And then I have, remember you just spent some horrendous price for it, so you may as well squeeze as much as you can out of its contents. The second thing I suggest is that you look at the table of contents. Every textbook that I've ever looked at has a table of contents in it. Would you agree? Most do. Now, what you may have done in the past is looked at the table of contents to see how long each chapter is or how many pages each chapter is. But the fact is if you look at what I wrote here, it says that the table of contents gives you just that, the contents. And contents means a lot. And then I say it gives you an outline of the book, topic by topic, and its pattern and structure. So if you do nothing else, you can get a sense of the structure and outline of the book and those topics that are going to be covered in it. How long should it take you to survey the table of contents? No more than 5 minutes. Approximately, you don't have to time it. Okay, another bullet, the third bullet. Did the author of your book write notes in the margins? Those notes will often summarize the section you are reading or name important terminology. Let me ask you an aside question here. How many of you here today are from a business class, accounting? How many of you are from the accounting class today? Half a dozen or more. Okay. What other, are any of you doing extra credit for this besides the accounting class? What class?
Academic skills.
Academic skills, the college success course? Yes. Okay, good. Anything else? Any other courses?
English.
Which English?
56.
56, and they said you could get extra credit if you came? Great, okay, so you have a textbook in there and then you also have novel that you have to read, or short story, 2 novels, okay. I'm just trying to get an idea of what books you're using right now. Okay, back to this handout. So notes in the margins, or marginal notes, which is another way to say that. And by the way, if there aren't marginal notes in your textbook, then you can put your own marginal notes in the textbook. Unfortunately, today we don't have time to go over how to do that if you don't know how. Pay attention to bolded or italicized words. There's a reason the words are meant to catch your attention. 5th bullet, does your textbook have a glossary? Here's a really important one. I've worked with students who get so angry at themselves because they find out midway through the semester, or maybe not even until the end of the term, that there was a glossary in the back of their text, but they didn't know that there was one because they didn't survey their book to see that there was one, and/or their instructor did not tell them. A lot of times your instructor will tell you, be sure to check out the glossary in the back of your text. So that's another good reason it's important to survey. And then, depending on the kind of textbook you're using, does your text have maps or timelines or diagrams or charts or marginal notes? I've already said marginal notes, I know. If yes, use them. And then, and this is not all, but then also the back of some textbooks will contain an appendix or two. Okay. That's another thing that, here's a trick. You won't know if there's an appendix. That's not to be confused with the one that's in our bodies. But you won't know whether there's an appendix or appendices unless you survey your book. How else would you find out if there's appendices in your book?
Table of contents.
Looking in the table of contents. The table of contents will tell you because it will be in there. All right? It'll, right at the end of all the table of contents, there would be appendices. What are they for? Well, you know, it depends on the class. With chemistry, you probably know chemistry way better than I, but you know, there would be certain charts that could be in the back of a chemistry book that would not be in the chapters, but might be in the appendices in the back. In a history class, say U.S. history, and I think I put that in here, there'd most likely be a copy of at least part of the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, a list of presidents when they were in office, the dates, the names. Those things that they're not going to put in the body of the textbook, but they would put in the back so that you can refer to them as needed. So these are just some of the items. So what is the moral of the story? The bottom line is know your textbook. Know what it offers and what it doesn't offer. What I didn't put on this bright green sheet is, does your textbook have opening statements at the beginning of each chapter that say something like, in this chapter you will learn the following, and then they bullet them. Once again, it would be really tempting to ignore that and just launch into the reading. But if you don't pay attention to that stuff that's at the beginning, you're not going to see the goal of that chapter. The person or people who wrote that chapter have a goal in mind with you. You might think the reading is boring, but they really want you to learn something, believe it or not. And so when they put those items at the beginning of the chapter, then they're expecting that those items will help you see the overall big picture of what you're going to get out of that chapter. Am I making sense at all? Okay, so for example, and I don't want to just use accounting as an example, but I ran to the accounting textbook that we have a copy of in the tutoring center because I wanted to see in accounting 1A and in accounting 1B, there are items at the beginning of each chapter. And for example, and this is 1A, accounting 1A, chapter 3 is adjusting accounts and preparing financial statements. And then it has something pretty amazing. It has a look back, a look at this chapter, and a look ahead. I'm not going to put it on the overhead right now because I want to get on with the SQ3R and show you. But it tells you what you did the chapter before, what you're going to do in this chapter, and what will actually follow in the next chapter. So it's giving you the picture again. And then it itemizes using this acronym CAP, the conceptual, the analytical, and the procedural. That sounds pretty darn dry to me. Okay. Conceptual means the concepts they want you to learn from this chapter. The analytical is how you will be analyzing the items in this chapter. I guess I'm not an accountant. I don't know. And then thirdly, the procedures, and that means some of the things that you will actually do, some of the things you will actually learn how to do. And the only thing I personally remember about accounting was credits and debits. You know, we'd make out these, we'd have to make records, and we do it all on paper now. I guess that's all done on the computer. But my point is, the chapter gives you an overview right before you start the actual reading as to what you will be learning in that chapter. Okay. Then in Accounting 1B, it says in an introduction before you, it has a chapter preview. And all I'm telling you is, class, whenever you have a chapter preview of any kind, whether it be called a preview or anything like a preview, be sure you take advantage of it. Because, for example, here in accounting it says, this chapter focuses on equity transactions. The first part of the chapter describes the basics of the corporate form of organization and explains the accounting for common and preferred stock. We then focus on several special financing transactions, etc. Okay. And then it has a breakdown of the things that will be covered in this chapter. Now, maybe as you read this, it's not as meaningful to you as it will be when you finally start reading the chapter and going to class and listening to the lectures, etc., and doing the work. But at least it'll give you an overview so you know. So here's what I would do. After you've read the chapter.
Pull the paper out away from your body.
Gotcha. No. After you've read the chapter, then do a test. Go back, look at the preview again, and say, okay, did I learn what was in the preview? Do I understand the information that's in the preview? And if you say no, then you need to check the chapter again. On the other hand, if you are thinking about what's in the preview through the whole chapter, then you're knowing what to mark. You're knowing what to pick out. Because you say on these cards, some of you say, I don't know what's most important. Well, the information that's in the preview gives you hints as to what's most important. Would you agree? It's a start. Now, to the SQ3R. I've been doing some research online about the best methods of textbook reading, for textbook reading, and I swear to you this SQ3R, otherwise known as SQ4R, keeps popping up over and over and over again. So there must be something to it. I always sound like I'm doing an infomercial when I talk about SQ3R, but I'm not. Here's the bottom line on SQ3R. I'll back up. I didn't ask you a question at the beginning, but I'm going to ask you now, and I'm asking for the audience at home that might be watching this someday. How many of you read your textbooks? How many of you don't? You're not going to raise your hand, are you? When you were in high school, how many of you read your textbooks? How many of you didn't? You don't have to raise your hand. You can just think about it. Okay, and there's more than one reason as to why you didn't. But the fact is one of the best ways to get better at textbook reading, boring though it may be to you, I can't help you with the boring right now, is you have to read them. You have to open them up and you have to start reading them. That's not what you want to hear, I know, but it's the truth. But on the cards that I've gotten in the past and today, I see things like I open up my textbook, I start reading, I get to the bottom of the page, I don't even know what I read. I went far away. I was thinking about something else. I was thinking about what I'm going to do tonight when I get home. I wasn't thinking about what I was reading. That is so normal to do that, especially with textbook reading. There's nothing wrong with you if you do that. But you know that you don't want to do that. You know, it's like driving from point A to point B, and you get to point B and you realize you weren't thinking about your driving at all. You were on robot. You were on automatic. You ever done that? With reading, we can read the words and they mean nothing to us, nothing. You get to the bottom of the page and they were just words. They went in one, out other. Okay. So that's what we know, that's what we call, let me get a darker pen. That's what we call, and you've probably heard this before, passive reading. You're only passively involved. You cannot lodge information into your long-term memory if you're reading passively, unless you know the subject so well that it doesn't matter. If you already know the subject, even if you're just reading words, you'll probably be okay, but if it's a new subject, oh my gosh. So what you need is, instead of a passive form of reading, you need an active form of reading. Active, I think you can figure out, means having a strategy that involves you, sucks you into the reading process. So you're actually thinking about what you're reading while you're reading it. Wouldn't that be nice? And I know some of you probably are pretty good at this. And you know, maybe when you read a novel, you have no problem. You're absorbed, you're like a character in the book and you're there. Some of you even have problems with reading novels. It's all difficult for you. But with reading textbooks, they're not novels, let's face it. They're not fascinating mysteries or science fiction or romance or whatever. So you need an active method, and that's what SQ3R is. So what's the S stand for?
Survey.
Exactly. Now, let me tell you something. This is a slightly different survey than the survey I'm suggesting that you do on our bright green sheet. What do you think? Raise your hand. What do you think the difference is between the survey on the Know Your Textbook handout and the survey on the SQ3R? Just generally speaking, what do you think the difference is? Want to take a guess? Well, I'll tell you. The survey here is what you do when you survey the entire book. The survey on the SQ3R handout is how to survey each chapter. Can you tell the difference there? Okay. So what does it tell you to do? For survey, you survey the title, the headings and the subheadings, the introductions and the summaries, charts, pictures, diagrams, review and discussion questions, and words in bold, print, or italics. Why do you think it would be helpful to do this kind of survey? What would this information on the bullets under survey help you?
Concept.
It would help you see the overall concepts, the general concepts that you're going to learn in that chapter? Good. It would give you the bigger picture. And I keep saying big picture over and over again, but it's true. Okay. I think, and that's going to lead us to the next step, the cue or question. And it's weird because I just read this yesterday, that continually going back to the titles and the headings of what you're reading are going to guide you through your reading. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So what we're going to do, I don't have time today to take you through all the steps of SQ3R. This is your handout. I'm hoping you'll actually keep it and perhaps even use it. And by the way, you can go online and get more information about SQ3R. But I want us to focus on the second step, the question. Especially the first line, it says for question, which is the cue in SQ3R. So survey. And then question. Here's, I think, the best part of SQ3R. And it's the best part because it gets you involved in what you're reading. It says, turn headings and subheadings into questions for which you must read to find the answer. Let me read that again. Turn headings and subheadings into questions for which you must read to find the answer. And then it says how you can even start the questions. Restate each heading using who, what, when, where, why, or how. And then it has some examples there for you. And I firmly believe that although it doesn't make your reading perfect, that if you keep referring back to the question that you posed for the heading whenever you can, then you know what you're supposed to be looking for in that section, and it will guide you along. So let me give you an example. First of all, I'm going to do two things. I don't have copies of the accounting text, but I can give you an example right now. Are most of you in 1A or 1B? 1A. I know not all of you are in accounting. I'm very well aware of this, and I will keep that in mind. This isn't just for accounting. Okay, just as an example. I have to put my glasses on. Okay, I'm the best student on earth, right? I've just opened up my accounting 1A book. I've given it a kiss. I'm telling it how much I love it. And I start reading this chapter. I've looked at the learning objectives for this chapter, and I'm getting a sense that I'm going to be learning something about periodic reporting and the time period principle. I'm going to be learning how to analyze accounting adjustments and link them to financial statements, and I'm going to be preparing and explaining adjusting entries. So, guess what the first section is once you get past the preview? The first section is entitled The Accounting Period. So if I'm going to turn that heading, this might seem silly to you, just go with me. If I'm going to turn the accounting period into a question, what would I say?
What is the accounting period important?
What is the accounting period? Why is it important? What does it have to do with accounting? Seriously. But what I'm bummed out about is I don't know. Here's the bigger thing. What does it have to do with adjusting accounts and preparing financial statements?
Right.
So what did I just do? I went back to the title of the chapter. I focused on that. Focusing on the title of the chapter, and I might have to keep going back to it. I might have to keep saying, okay, what am I supposed to be learning in this chapter? I'm supposed to be learning about adjusting accounts and preparing financial statements. I don't want to lose sight of that. I need to keep remembering that. And then I'm going to learn about how the accounting period relates to this title. Am I making sense? Okay. Next heading. Accrual basis versus cash basis. So I know I'm going to be learning something about So I would pose a question like, what is accrual basis versus cash basis? So what does versus mean? Versus, V-E-R-S-U-S, if you see versus. That means opposite, right? So what's the difference between accrual basis and cash basis? I would ask that. And I would ask that same dang question again, and what does that have to do with adjusting accounts and preparing financial statements? And then in that section, I know that I need to be looking for, sorry, this is a mess because it's upside down. I need to be looking for the answer to the question I have posed, and that's what I need to be marking in this section. And maybe it's all of it because it looks like it's such a short section. But if I focus on the heading and the title and I keep going back to the title, I am definitely going to begin to get the big picture of this. Any of you ever taken Western Civ? Covers a vast amount of time and information. Okay. So you tell me, what's the title? What's the title of this? The Growth of Medieval Towns. So what, would you pass me back there? So what should we be learning in this chapter? How those towns grew. How did medieval towns grow? Why did they grow? Go back to your SQ3R handout where the question step is, and it says you can turn your questions into, you can begin them with a who or a what or a why or a how. So here's your first title. Here's the title, The Growth of Medieval Towns. So you constantly are keeping that in mind. How did they grow? Why did they grow? When did they grow? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, look at the first heading under the growth of medieval towns. I know that this is an awful copy. I apologize for that, but turn it over. Get past the introduction, if you will. But before you do, we only have a few minutes, but who cares? We've got plenty of time. Before you get actually in this textbook, and this is why it's good to know your textbook, before you even get to the first section, I want you to notice what it says. I think it's boxed off, but it's only boxed off because I boxed it off. You see where it says, in short, blah, blah, blah. Chapter 7 tells how. Do you all see that? It's on the second page. So here's a heads up right here. So in Chapter 7, we're going to learn town life revived in the later Middle Ages, education and learning advanced, and literature and the arts express the spirit of medieval times. And do all three of those items relate back to the title, The Growth of Medieval Towns? Yes, they do. Now, here's something I haven't told you. If you really want to keep referring back to the title, which I recommend you do, you need to understand the title. You need to know what medieval means. Chances are, as you're reading this text, and chances are if this were a class you were taking, you and your instructor and your note-taking and your lecture listening, you'd learn what medieval means. But if your instructor is assuming you know what medieval means, then you owe it to yourself to be clear on what that word means. So you need to have a full understanding of the terminology within that title. How does that seem? You need to know what medieval means. Okay, so item 1, town life revived in the later Middle Ages. Now, look what the first section title is. Town life revived in the later Middle Ages. You see that right below? So let's turn that into a heading. Just turn it into a heading. Try it. Anybody want to raise their hand on that? How was town life revived in the later Middle Ages? And by the way, and this is just, I'm modeling this for you. You need to know what revived means. You need to know. Vocabulary is a huge part of reading. So you need to be clear. You might find out what revived means as you read this section. And revived can mean more than one thing. You can revive a person back to life. It's kind of related to the meaning of this, but it can mean more than one thing. So what you do is this. You turn this into a question. I don't have my glasses on. How was town life revived in the later Middle Ages? Maybe why was town life, revived in the later Middle Ages? And then go back to the title of the chapter. And how did that relate to the growth of the medieval towns? You see what I'm doing? I'm taking you back to the title so you can keep seeing the big picture. All this is about the growth of medieval towns. Now, if you'll notice, at the bottom of the page that's on the second page, it's really just on the flip side of the first page or the front, you'll notice in tiny little letters the title. You see it in italics? The growth of medieval towns. I wish they'd put it in really big, bold letters at the top of each page to remind you of what the big picture is, what the title is. So you have to do it yourself. Unfortunately, they don't put it at the bottom of every page. They put it at the bottom of every other page in this textbook. This is a slightly older textbook. I'm using it as an example. Okay, we have a few more minutes. What's the next heading?
Education.
Education and learning advanced. That is in the part that I boxed off to you, but the fact is because I only gave you 2 pages, we've only got the part about town life revived in the later Middle Ages, so we're sticking with that right now. So what's the next heading when you turn the page? What's the next italicized heading? And this is bolded, by the way, but you can hardly tell because this is just a copy.
Resurgence of trade.
Resurgence of trade began in Italy. Do you see that, class? Class, you're my class. The resurgence of trade began in Italy. So, are there any vocabulary words that you would need to do a quick check on? Just to make sure you know what resurgence means. What's the base word of resurgence? Resurge. What is a smaller word within the word resurge? Surge. That's a word in the news lately. To resurge is again surge. So what do you think resurgence means? Just guess. We don't have to be perfect with this. To rise up again. To increase again. To grow again. Re means again. What's the heading? Growth of medieval towns. Do you see the logic here? There is some logic to textbook reading. It's not perfect. It doesn't solve everything. So, but it helps. So how can we turn the resurgence of trade began in Italy into a question that you can then look for the answer? What would be a question we could do there?
How did the resurgence of trade happen?
How did the resurgence of trade begin in Italy? How did it happen? And why did it begin in Italy? I like that. I like your question. What was this resurgence of trade that began in Italy? And how did it relate to the growth of medieval towns? Okay? And then you would be looking for that as you read. And then finally, there's a couple more headings on the next page, on the back side of this. Trade fairs became an important feature of the European economy. Let's just take a stab at it. What would be a question there? How is always a good place to start, right? How did trade fairs become an important feature of the European community? How and why are always good questions to ask. Why is always great because it helps you understand the reasons behind something, and whys are a part of cause and effect is what history is about. So that would be a great thing to do there. And how did trade fairs in the European economy relate to what? The growth of medieval towns. You see what we're doing? I know it seems redundant, but we keep referring back to the title as a guide as we go through this. And then the last heading is the use of money replaced the practice of barter. Any vocabulary words you'd need to do a check on? Perhaps barter. Now, would you perhaps find out what barter means as you read this section? Possibly. If not, you need to do a check with yourself. Did I learn what barter means? What does barter mean?
Bartering, you're trading to do a job for somebody.
You're trading. If you'll do this for me, I'll do this for you. Something you're good at, you would trade with me. Rather than money passing through. Okay, so you could turn that into how did the use of money replace the practice of bartering? Why did it replace the practice of bartering? And what did that have to do with? It must have had something to do with the growth of medieval towns. Do you have any questions about what we've done right now? Okay, let's just review for a couple moments before we go. First of all, I want to thank you for being here today. And then, what's one piece of advice you can pass on to somebody else now about textbook reading? Because the way you learn is passing information on or teaching somebody else.
Surveying your book.
Survey your book, good. Know what's in your book when you first get it. And what about chapter reading? What's one of the most important things you can do?
Turn the headers into questions.
Turn your headings into questions, good. And keep referring back to what? Title. Title, whenever you can. Okay, thank you so much for being here. Go enjoy the rest of the day.